Hey folks, hope you're okay. Welcome back to the gym, the studio. It is me, Andrew Chadwick, and I'm back with another Training Tip Tuesday for you. And I'm excited this week because we're going to be bringing you the hip thrust. So if you struggle with maybe your deadlifts, maybe your straight leg deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts, and you want to develop your glutes and hamstrings, this is going to be a great exercise for you. If you've liked any of the videos in the series, make sure you check out them. If you haven't, go ahead and like the videos, subscribe to the channel and keep up to date with all the content that we're bringing. And make sure you check out the Friday Fitness, the Motivation Mondays with the Mindset Muscle podcast, and we'll bring some great content, so keep up to date and let us know anything that you want to see, so post those comments down below. I'm going to quickly change into my workout gear and we're going to get into the workout, so sit back, relax, and we'll get into the hip thrusts now. So in terms of movement classification, the first one we've got to look at is going to be your hips. Now primarily we're looking at a hip thrust, so the dominant area is going to be the hips, and then we'll work down to knees and ankles as well, because they are partly involved with the movement. Okay, so the first thing we've got to look at from the side, we're actually going to be focusing on a hip extension and hip flexion portion of the movement. Okay, so if you imagine that we've got a bar across the hips, as we go down, we're going to be lowering down, we're going to be going to this flex position here. Okay, so if we were to draw a straight line from the knees to the hips to the shoulders, we're pretty much straight in line here. From here, nice and controlled, we're flexing at the hips, and that gap is just shortened here, and we're creating that angle. Okay, so we're going to that 90-degree angle, and that's flexing at the hips here. Okay, this is where we're really lengthening out the hamstrings. We're bringing into the lower back and the glutes into activation here, and then when we start to come back up, this is extension now. We're driving the hips forward and then extending the hips back up again. Okay, so it's that full extension here. The one thing we've always got to be wary of is that we don't overextend and we kind of hyperextend the lower back. So we're focused on the extension of the hips here. So again, from side on, we're going nice and controlled, flexing at the hip down. Imagine the bar is across the hips here, and as we drive back up, we're extending the hips back up to the top, and we're squeezing the glutes. So as soon as the hips are fully extended, that's as far as we need to go. The glutes are activated, and we've got back to that full extension position there. Okay, so we've got flexion and extension of the hips there. That's what we're looking at there, nice and controlled, driving up, making sure the hips are fully extended, squeezing the glutes, keeping the hamstrings activated, and we'll get a good contraction there. So the next thing we've got to look at is going to be knee flexion. And it's somewhat of I want to say like an isometric position with the knee. Okay, so when we actually watch the technique video, we're going to see that the knees typically stay about 90-degree bend in the movement, but because of the actual kind of loading, the hamstrings are always under tension. So we're actually looking at knee flexion where we're holding the tension in the hamstrings. Okay, and as we start to extend the hips back to the top, the hamstrings actually shorten slightly, so they're actually going to be involved there a fair bit. It's an assisting position, but it's a fair bit of activation there. So in terms of what we're looking at with the movement itself is very much going to be just a knee flexion. Okay, so imagine that from the bottom of the floor here, my heel is coming up and I'm shortening that angle at the knee joint. So nice and controlled again. Imagine a hamstring curl. I'm shortening the range of motion, or I'm increasing the range of motion, so I'm shortening the joint angle there, and I'm creating that 90-degree bend. Now just with the hip thrust, like I say, when we go into the movement, you'll see that we're going to be holding that position throughout the whole pressing position. Okay, so we're holding that knee flexion. Okay, we're keeping the tension in the hamstrings all the way through. So then finally, to finish off, we have plantar flexion and dorsiflexion of the feet. Okay, now we've looked at this in different exercises and different movements, but when we're performing the hip thrust, we do still have some plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. Okay, so plantar flexion is simply where the toes go down and the heels go up, so we'd extend into this position here, and when we dorsiflex, we basically go up onto the heels. Okay, so you'd see a shortening of the angle at the ankle. Okay, so again, plantar flexion is where we increase the angle, and we're just looking kind of anteriorly at the front of the body. So the joint of the ankle is opening as we go up onto our toes. So again, if you imagine a 90-degree angle there at the ankle, as I go up onto my toes, I'm probably creating a 135-degree angle there. Okay, now when we go into dorsiflex and the the toe comes up towards the shin, we're decreasing that angle. So we'd be looking at 90 degrees down to, say, 65, 60 degrees. So we're getting into the technique and rep ranges, and the first thing I want to know is kind of the technique on this clip, and then I can go into the rep ranges in a moment. So initially I want you to notice that I've got a 90-degree bend at my knees, which was the isometric contraction we were talking about in the kind of movement classifications of the knee flexion. And you'll see here that as I'm going back, I'm rocking kind of into my heels, and that's where the weight is transferring. And that's where you'll start to see the plantar flexion and the dorsiflexion of the feet, okay, and of the ankle joint. So in terms of technique, what we want to focus on is taking the bar across the hips. Ideally, I would recommend getting a hip thrust pad. If your gym has one, use it. If it doesn't, a mat folded over like this will suffice. You may just find as you start to get heavier that it will start to put a little bit of pressure upon the hips. Now, I'd recommend taking your feet probably about hip width apart. You can go slightly wider depending on what feels most comfortable. Again, we can talk anatomically perfect, but everyone is different, so kind of go with what works for you. And again, we're focused on driving the hips up to level with the kind of shoulders, hips and knees all in line, so we're trying to create that full extension. But again, like I mentioned in the anatomical positions or the movement classifications, we want to be wary of avoiding of overextending or hyperextending at the back, okay? The one thing that you'll see in this clip, again, feet are hip width, toes are kind of relatively neutral. I've got a band on, and that's just because it's going to create a lot more tension through the glutes. Now, in terms of rep ranges for this movement and this exercise, we can literally go anywhere from 15 to 20 reps, sometimes even more, all the way down to like 5 reps, 3 reps, because it's got such a great availability. Now, with a deadlift, we'll find that the back will fatigue very quickly, whereas with a hip thrust, we're so isolated on the glutes, we can actually do high volume and low volume. Okay, so find what works for you, but do a multitude of different ones. So work from high to low rep ranges with this exercise. So the main common areas we typically see is with like setup and with kind of overextending of the back, which I've mentioned a couple of times. Now, the one I will always look at is when people perform this movement, their chin will be up, and as they press, their glutes don't really get to the top and their back will arch. It's very difficult to tell when you've got a t-shirt on with this, but what you'll notice here is they're not able to get that full extension of the hips. Their chin is kind of high and their head is high, and there's a big disconnect in the back there. Okay, so the hips aren't doing the work, it's the back, and the chin isn't involved. The next thing we're going to look at is going to be kind of poor setup position, and we've got the heels too close here. Okay, so as we're driving up, you can see that the knees are going over the toes, and that's just going to involve a lot more of the quads. Okay, so we're actually going to be bringing in the quads here. The opposite to that is as we're driving up, the heels are too far out, and this is just simply going to mean that we're not getting full activation of the glutes. The knee joint and the ankle joint isn't effectively set up properly, so we can get proper positioning of the glutes and activation of the glutes. And then the final one I'm just trying to highlight here is what we're looking for is the chin is tucked, we're driving the hips up, and we're just getting that full extension of the hips, as high as that will be for each person. Again, it will be highly individual. So there you have it, folks. That's this week's Training Tip Tuesday. Now, I hope you've got something away from it. If you did, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, keep up to date with all the content. Make sure you do check out other videos in the TV series with our Mind Muscle Connection podcast, our Friday Fitness for Golfers. Now, we have got a program that we are working on with a group of golfers at the minute, and we're going to be looking at ready to kind of launch it in March time. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Make sure you join us on social media through Instagram and Facebook at the EPTA, or the Elite Personal Training Academy, and we will be back with some great content for you next week. So for now, I hope you enjoyed the hip thrusts. Go ahead and implement that into your routine and strengthen up those glutes. And I'll see you all next week in Training Tip Tuesday. Peace out.